Boker Tov. This morning's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Vav, Yevamos 36. So let's just recap a little bit. The Gemara is in the middle of a dispute around 10 lines from the bottom on 35b. The 10 lines from the bottom on 35b. The Gemara is recording in the middle of a dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. In a circumstance where, let's just say, Rachel falls to Yibum with Ruvain, and Ruvain does Yibum or Chalitza with her, and then at that point, after he does Yibum or Chalitza, he discovers that Rachel is actually pregnant. Now, obviously, if the woman is pregnant, she really is not supposed to fall to Yibum, because if there's an offspring for Ruvain's brother, then there's no Yibum or Chalitza with his wife. But in this case, he didn't realize she was pregnant, so he did the Yibum or Chalitza. But then afterwards, after he did the Yibum or Chalitza, she miscarried. So now there's a dispute whether or not that Yibum or Chalitza he did while she was pregnant, thinking she was not pregnant. It turns out in the end she isn't pregnant, but she was pregnant. Whether or not the Yibum or Chalitza is valid. Rabbi Yochanan says it's a valid Yibum or Chalitza, because if Elijah the prophet would come and say that she's not going to have an offspring, you would need it. That his brother's not going to have offspring. Whereas Rish Lakish says no, it's not a valid Yibum or Chalitza. So comes along the Gemara, and Gemara challenges Rabbi Yochanan, 10 lines from the bottom on 35b. Meisvei, we learned, Akone says Yevim, we learned if, let's say somebody does Yibum with their Yevama, then he discovers she's pregnant. Harezu lotinasa tzarasa. So now we're talking about, let's say Rachel is one of the Yevamos, and also in addition to Rachel is Rivka, who's her co-wife. So Rachel and Rivka. So now Rachel, he does Yibum with Rachel. Reuven does Yibum with Rachel, and then he discovers, guess what? She's pregnant. So now the co-wife cannot marry without a Yibum or Chalitza. Why? Shema Yevlad ben Kayama. Lest they have a viable offspring. The Gemara says, wait 1 second. Just the opposite. Adarabba. Just the opposite. If you have a viable offspring, then Rivka, the co-wife of Rachel, for sure she can marry. There's an offspring, so she doesn't have to do Yibum or Chalitza. For sure she can marry somebody from the market, as they say. So the Gemara says, Adarabba, so rather, maybe Shema maybe the offspring will not be viable. Maybe, and so therefore the co-wife should not marry, because maybe the offspring will not be viable, and so therefore she'll need Yibum or Chalitza. And presumably, as the Gemara is about to say, presumably that means that the Yibum or Chalitza that was done while Reuven thought Rachel was pregnant is not effective, because otherwise, for sure, she either would have had a Yibum or there's a viable offspring. So it must be that the Yibum or Chalitza done while she's pregnant is not effective. So it's a question on Rabbi Yochanan supports Rish Lakish. As the Gemara says, if you're going to be in the position that the Yibum with a pregnant woman is a valid Yibum, why can't the co-wife marry? Why isn't we say that she is exempted automatically with the Yibum of her of Rachel? So Amar Abaye, says, okay, let's recalibrate. When as it comes to Yibum, everybody's going to be on the position. Even Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that if you do Yibum with a pregnant woman, it's not effective. It doesn't release her. The only argument is by Chalitza itself. Rabbi Yochanan says Chalitza is mubar shma Chalitza bia mubar shma bia. Rabbi Yochanan says Chalitza with a pregnant woman is valid, but not Yibum. Whereas Rish Lakish says Bias Mumbaris Loshma Bia Chalitza Mumbaris Loshma Chalitza. Whereas Rish Lakish says that the Yibum with neither Yibum nor Chalitza with a pregnant woman is effective. So Amalei Rava challenges Abai. He says, what are you talking about? Why are you saying that you can draw a distinction between Yibum and Chalitza here? Manav Shach, meaning one way or the other, it doesn't make sense. If the Yibum with a pregnant woman is effective, then Chalitza Mubarash Chalitza. Then the Chalitza should be effective with the pregnant woman. And if the Bia is not, if the Yibum is not effective, Chalitza is not effective. So we're on top of 36a, because we have a principle which we've seen several times throughout this tractate. We've seen it on Daf Gimel and multiple places. We've said Kol oil yibam oil chalitza, kol she'eno oil yibam eno oil chalitza. Meaning to say that if it's effective for yibam, it's effective for chalitza. If it's not effective for chalitza, it's not effective for yibam. And so therefore, if you're going to say the yibam of a pregnant woman is not effective, then also the chalitza of a pregnant woman shouldn't be effective. So they go together. They go in tandem. They're a pair. So therefore, El Amar Rava. So therefore, Rava teaches Hachi Kamer. This is what we need to say. Hakonis Yevamaso Benimtes Mehuberes. Let's say Hakonis Yevamaso. So Rava says, let's have a different approach to this whole concept. Rava says Hakonis Yevamaso, one who does Yibum Benimtes Mehuberes, and after he does the Yibum, he discovers that she is indeed pregnant. That's the case we're talking about. The co-wife cannot marry. Why? What's the reasoning? Shema Vlad ben Kayama. Excuse me. So again, what does Rabbi say? One who does Yibam and then he discovers she's pregnant. The co-wife cannot marry. In this case, Rivka can't marry. Why? Unless the offspring will be viable. Unless the offspring will be viable. And so therefore the Yibam and the Chalitza were not effective. So basically, if you the point is, if you do Yibam or Chalitza with a woman, you discover she's pregnant, you can't well, all this price is saying is that you have to wait. The co-wife cannot marry yet because she first needs to see if this offspring was viable, and therefore, if the offspring is viable, then she's not released to the marketplace until the baby is born. And so that's what we're referring to here, that since the baby is not born yet, therefore the co-wife has to wait in order to get married. So the Gemara says, Tanya Kavase de Rava. We have a brayso that supports Rava's reading. If you do Yibam and then you discover she's pregnant, in this case, the co-wife, let's call her Rivka, cannot marry. Shema Vlad ben Kayama, she has to wait until the offspring is born. And if the offspring is viable, the Yibam and Chalitza will not be effective because the offspring is viable. And so therefore the Yibam and the Chalitza is not what's releasing her, but the Vlad is what's releasing her. And Vlad poter, Vlad ain't poter, and the offspring does not exempt until it's actually born. And so therefore she has to wait until the offspring is born. So the Gemara says, well, maybe this is now a proof against Rish Lakish. Time of the Shemi Vlad ben Kayamahu. Oh, so what's the reason why the co-wife has to wait? Because maybe the offspring that Rachel is carrying, maybe it will be viable. But that were not the case. Vlad ben Kayama, if the offspring were not viable, Mifter Tarasa, maybe the co-wife would have been exempt from the Yibam or Chalitza. So if that's the way we read it, limit the Avitiyuf to the Rish Lakish. So why don't we say that this therefore is a refutation of Rish Lakish? Gemara says no. Amrocha Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish would say Hachi Katani. Rish Lakish would say that this is how we would read it. Hakonis Yevama. So that one who does Yibam with Yevama, Benimse Smuberes, and then we discover that in fact she is pregnant. Hareza Lotinasa Terasa. The co-wife cannot marry. Shema Loya Vlad ben Kayama. Maybe the offspring will not be viable. But Chalitza Muberes. And therefore, chalitza and the muberes is not considered a chalitza. Ubias muberes loshma bia. And so, maybe the offspring, the chalitza will not be viable because she was pregnant. Vim Tomar, if you want to say no, she can get married right away. Why? Maybe we can allow the co-wife to get married right away because we assume that since her Rachel is carrying a baby, and most babies are viable. So no, it's not going to be effective yet. Why? The offspring doesn't work. It doesn't exempt you from Yibam or Chalitza until it's actually born. And so therefore, Rish Lakish says it's not a proof against me. So now, just to recap, we've seen that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish dispute a circumstance where a man did yibum or chalitza, and then we discovered afterwards that he wasn't supposed to because the woman was pregnant. So Rabbi Yochanan says that yibum or chalitza is still effective in a case where she miscarries, and so she doesn't need another one. Whereas Rish Lakish says no, she would need another yibum or chalitza because it's not effective since she was pregnant at the time. So we're going to say, the Gemara is going to say on the bottom of the page that actually the rule is going to be, the law is going to be ruled in favor of Rish Lakish. So the Gemara anticipates that with Rebbe Lazar saying, Afshar Iso Ahad Rish Lakish, is it possible that there is such a ruling like Rish Lakish? And so, yet nobody, and we don't have a Mishnah like it. They went out and they found such a Mishnah. The Tanan, we found the Mishnah, the Gemara thinks, that from the end of Yevamos, which says, let's say, in this case, there's Rachel's a woman, and she's married to Reuven, and Reuven is also married to Rivka. So let's say Reuven and Rivka go overseas, and now Rachel's back, and her husband and co-wife are overseas, and they come back and they say to Rachel, your husband has died. So now Shimon is back. Rachel's in Yerushalayim with Shimon, Reuven's brother. So she needs yibum or chalitza. But we say hareza lo tinase otis yabein. We say Rachel can't get married and she can't do yibum with Shimon in Jerusalem. Ad sheteda, until she knows for sure that Rivka was not pregnant. Shema muberes hitzarasa. We have to make for sure that we have to make certain that Rivka is not pregnant and carrying Reuven's child. Because then she wouldn't be allowed to marry Shimon, and she wouldn't need yibum. So the Gemara says, "Bishlama yivume lo." We understand why she doesn't do yibum. Shema yevla ben kayama v'yivka b'yisur eishas after. So we understand why Rachel can't do yibum until we see if Rivka is carrying a child, because maybe Rivka's child is not viable, and then then Rachel will have done maybe Rivka's child will be viable, and then Rachel will have done a sin by being with her brother Shimon. But why can't we say she does chalitza? What's the problem with her doing chalitza? I understand if she would do the chalitza within 9 months and then get married right away within 9 months. I understand why we can't do that. Hainu safek, because then there's a doubt. Because what's the doubt? The doubt under those circumstances. Is that we have to be concerned that maybe the co-wife is pregnant and she's going to give birth to a completely good offspring, and then the offspring doesn't exempt you until the baby is born, like Rish Lakish was saying. So that's proof for Rish Lakish. Fine, I understand that. But why can't she have the chalitza within 9 months and then get married after 9 months? So why don't we say that she just do the chalitza now and then get married afterwards? So from the fact that we don't allow it, that must mean it's proof for Rish Lakish that we need to wait until after the baby is born, after her co-wife is not pregnant, in order to do the chalitza. Because if you do chalitza with a pregnant woman, it's not going to be effective. So the Gemara says that's not a proof. Gemara says according to you, according to your logic, that you said that the Mishnah is saying that you're not allowed to do chalitza to get married because maybe the chalitza of a co-wife is not effective. If that's the case, why does it say you're prohibited to get married until you know if the co-wife is pregnant? Even many years, you should say tachot. It should just say she should do the chalitza after 9 months, and for sure she's not pregnant. And she should just get married after 9 months. So from the fact that we don't say that, the Gemara says Ella bar minei dahi. We have to say that this. You don't bring a proof from this source for Rish Lakish. So from the Brisa, don't bring a source from the fact that it says that she should do. From the fact that it says in the Brisa that she shouldn't do the chalitza within 9 months and then get married after 10 months. That's not the reason, because we're concerned that she might marry somebody in between. The reason is different. What's the reasoning? It's like Abaye bar Abba and Rav Chanina bar Abaye, the Amrit Shavah, both of them taught Shema Yevla ben Kayama. No, because we're worried about something else. What are we worried about? We're worried that actually she'll do the chalitza out of a doubt when she doesn't need to, and then Rivka will give birth. She'll have waited, but now she'll say, oh, I didn't really need the chalitza. So, and then she'll go ahead and marry the Kohen because it wasn't a chalitza. Well, that's a problem, because if a woman is not allowed to marry, if a woman had chalitza, then rabbinically we say it's like a divorce and she can't marry a Kohen. So therefore, nimtzas atamatricha cruz kahuna. Well, then you need to send out email messages to the world. She's actually didn't have chalitza. She's allowed to marry a Kohen, and that's a problem. Marcel Litzrach, what's the big deal? No, we don't like to do this. Maybe somebody was there for the chalitza and not for they didn't get the proclamation, they didn't get the email message. And they'll come to say kasharya chalutza Kohen, and then they're going to come to say that they are allowing chalutza, a woman who had chalitza, to marry a Kohen, and we don't want to say that. So that's one approach. Abaye gives a different explanation of the Brisa. Abaye says the Brisa doesn't say midego tiflas l'tisiyavim katani. Brisa is not actually a proof for Reish Lakish because it doesn't say you can't do chalitza and you can't do yibam. It says lo tinaseh l'tisiyavim katani. It all says you can't get married or do yibam. Below chalitza avali chalitza achinami desharia. But if he would have done. If you would have done chalitza even within 9 months, she would be permitted to get married after 9 months. And so therefore, in fact, Abaye says we could read it like Rabbi Yochanan and not necessarily proof for Reish Lakish. But the Gemara does say we do have a brisa that supports Reish Lakish. Tanya Kavasi the Reish Lakish. We have a brisa supports Reish Lakish. Acholitza mu'beres, you do chalitza with a pregnant woman, v'ipila, and then she miscarries. Tzricha chalitza mina. If you do chalitza with a pregnant woman and then she miscarries, you need chalitza from the brothers. Meaning to say, it doesn't matter that you did it once, you have to do it again. And this is like Reish Lakish. The chalitza of a pregnant woman is not effective. And so now, says Rava, Amarava, help us say, Kavasi the Reish Lakish, Bani Tlas. The law is like Reish Lakish. Presumably, when he argues with Rabbi Yochanan, in these 3 cases, and there are 3 circumstances where we say the law is like Reish Lakish arguing with Rabbi Yochanan. What are these 3 cases? The Tanan. What are the 3 cases? The first case is that which we just taught, that if you do a chalitza or even with a pregnant woman, it's not effective. Second is idach the Tanan. We learned in the Mishnah. Let's say, as a background, we know that a person he's allowed to bequeath property. A person can give away his property to whoever he wants, but once he dies, his property is inherited according to the laws of biblical inheritance. I.e., firstborn son gets 2 shares and the other sons get 1 share. So let's say a person wants to divide up his assets. A person wants to divide up his assets. He does this while he's still alive. He's giving 1 person more, 1 person less. And he says the firstborn, you don't get a double portion, you get like everybody else. That's effective because that's a gift. That's not an inheritance. But if he says, I'm writing my will and this is what you get, then he's done nothing. Why? Why has he done nothing there? Because he's masna mashakasav Torah. He's stipulating against what's written in the Torah. But let's say kasav bein b'tzila bein b'sof bein b'emtza mishum matana. But if at some point in the contract he writes that this is a gift, then it's made clear that this is a gift and his words are effective. We're on top of 36b. Amar Reish Lakish, however, says Olam Okana Achi Yomer Ploni Ploni Yarshu Stay Ploni Uplonis Shinasati Lamb and Matana Yarshu. Reish Lakish says it's not going to be effective until he writes specifically in the contract that every single person gets it as a gift. Not enough just to write it once as a gift. He has to make clear that it's for every person. And so that's another case where we rule like Reish Lakish. What's the third case where we rule like Reish Lakish? We learned in the Mishnah. So as a background, let's say that this is going to be something we deal with a lot in Baba Basra and also Baba Kama. But there's something called Kinyan HaPeres and Kinyan HaGuf. Kinyan HaGuf is, let's say you have a tree, you own the tree. That's called Kinyan HaGuf. You own the principle. Kinyan Peros is you own the fruits of the tree, the dividends. So do you own a building? Do you own the rent? Do you have the right to the rent or the right to the building? Do you own the tree or do you own the fruits? So that's what this is referring to. So a man has a tree and he says, I'm writing my tree is going to belong to my son, but only la'achar moso, but only after I die. So the father Yaakov says to his son Reuben, you get my tree, but only after I die. So now we say that because of that, so basically in essence, the father Yaakov is retaining the rights to the oranges of the tree. He's giving away the tree to the son while he's still alive, but he's saying, since you only get it after I'm dead, that means in the meantime, I have the oranges of the tree. I have what's called the fruits. So therefore, under these circumstances, now the father can't sell the tree. Why not? He says, I gave the tree to my son, so he can't sell it. The son can't sell the tree because the father has the fruits. So he can't sell the tree. But let's say they did it. Let's say the father went ahead and sold the tree to a third party. Then the tree is considered sold until the father dies. Let's say the son, Reuven, sold the tree. Then the purchaser gets nothing until the father dies. Okay. And we learned about this. Now we have a wrinkle. The son sold the tree while the father was still alive. And now we had said that if the son sells the tree, then the purchaser gets nothing until the father dies. But now the father doesn't die, the son dies. And now the son dies first. So what's the status of that tree? Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan says the purchaser hasn't acquired it because the son didn't have the fruits. The son only had the tree, didn't really own it. Whereas Reish Lakish says, Reish Lakish says the son has acquired, the person who bought it from the son acquired it. Why? Rabbi Yochanan because the purchaser hasn't acquired it because the father retains the fruits. And he says, kinyan aperos, kinyan aguftami. Whoever owns the fruits, it's like they really own the essence. And so therefore, since the father owns the oranges, the son can't sell it. Reish Lakish says, no, the purchaser who bought the fruits, the purchaser who bought the tree really has acquired it because even though the father owns the fruits, he still doesn't own anything. Kinyan aperos, kinyan aguftami. Just because you own the fruits doesn't mean you really own the tree. So that's just a taste. We're just wetting our flavor for Baba Basra, Baba Kama. So therefore, we're just wetting our appetites for this idea. And the law is like Reish Lakish that owning the fruits is not considered like kinyan aguftam. It's not considered like owning the property. So now we had said that if this woman, let's say Reuven does Yibam with Rachel, and then he discovers that Rachel was pregnant and she gives birth. If the offspring was not viable, then Reuven's allowed to maintain his relationship with her, even though he had done Yibam when he wasn't supposed to because she was pregnant. But technically speaking, his brother Shimon did not have any offspring, so therefore he's allowed to remain with her. That's what the Mishnah says. What comes on the Gemara, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Amru Yotzi beget, that he has to divorce her with a get. He's not allowed to maintain his relationship with her since he wasn't supposed to be with her in the first place. He really was supposed to wait and to see whether or not the offspring was viable, and so therefore now he should. He says, we penalize him that he has to divorce her because he married her in a time where he shouldn't have, because she was possibly a prohibited woman to him, and so therefore we require him to divorce her. So that's what that's how Rashi explains it. And even though right now we realize that she didn't meet Yibam, nevertheless, we require a divorce. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Eliezer, Amar Davar Echad. So this idea of Rabbi Eliezer, that if you married a woman when you really shouldn't have, we would force you to terminate the relationship. This is the same thing that Rabbi Meir taught. So they're consistent with each other. What did Rabbi Meir teach us? The Tanya we learned, a person should not marry if there's a woman who's nursing or pregnant. You can't marry her. Why? Because if she's nursing, the baby is we're concerned that you might get her pregnant again, and then or her milk will dry up, and the new husband won't take care of somebody else's child. So therefore, you're not allowed to marry her. Vim nasa, and if you do marry her, yotzi v'yachzir olam. Rameir says you have to divorce her, and you can never remarry her. The Chachamim say yotzi. No, you could separate from her. So when it comes time, after 24 months, you could remarry her. So when the fact that Rameir says you have to divorce her, it shows that he's consistent with Rabbi Eliezer. It says that you have to divorce her. Abai says the two cases are not the same. Why do you say they're the same? Maybe they're not the same. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer says here you need to give this woman a get who you entered into the marriage out of a suffix when you shouldn't have done it. Because you were playing around with something really bad with your brother's wife that you weren't supposed to. It's a biblical violation of Ohasam, and in that case, the Rabbanan, but in that case, it's a rabbinic law that the rabbis instituted that you're not allowed to marry a nursing or pregnant woman. Maybe Rabbanan's fair way. Maybe you hold like the rabbis, and in fact, you're allowed to do it. Or Inami, or alternatively, Adkan, maybe we say Adkan will come to Rameir Hasam. Maybe Rameir says there that you have to end a relationship with Mishum Rabbanan because it's a rabbinic law, and we find this several cases in Shas. The Chachamim also the rabbis are actually stricter by rabbinic law because they're worried you weren't going to be as serious about it. But in this case, Midya Raisa, where it's a biblical law, Mifresh Parshaminei, they would separate and they would know not to play around, and they would be more careful. So we wouldn't force them to separate. So Amar Rava, and Rava now says, according to the Chachamim, who say that you just have to separate for 20 until the 24 months are up, you would see a beget. Yeah, but you still have to give her a divorce. And Amar Marzutra, they could not, indeed we can infer this, they katani yotzi v'lo katani yafrish. Shmamina. That you separate with a divorce, you separate with the actual divorce and not just to separate. That's what Rava says according to the Rabbanan. Yeah, I'm happy to take it.